Sometimes it's difficult to truly comprehend what some members may have gone through.
Lest we forget, honoring Indigenous veterans.
Freedom is never free.
Winnipeg marks National Indigenous Veterans Day.
It's really tasking, and there's a lot of them out there, and we could never write enough grants to get enough money.
Candidates in the Northwest Territories vie for a seat. Good evening and welcome to APTN National News. I'm Savannah Kelly. In Ottawa, a ceremony of remembrance took place at the National Aboriginal Veterans Memorial. It's a day to shine the light on the contribution of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit service men and women who were often overlooked in the past. Here's Annette Francis with that story.
Approximately 80 people gathered for the quiet ceremony, including representatives from the federal government. Following a few speeches, wreaths were placed on the Veterans Monument to honor the more than 12,000 Indigenous men and women who have served this country. It was a sunny but cold day. In spite of cold feet, Catherine Askew says it's humbling.
I think of the soldiers who were in the trenches, who were frozen for months at a time, whose feet were riddled with sores and mud from the conditions they lived in. And so my feet, although they're cold, it doesn't mean much compared to their sacrifice.
Askew has served in the Canadian Forces for 26 years. She comes from a long line of dedicated veterans on her father's side from the Moose Factory First Nation. In all, she says it amounts to 110 years. My
great-grandfather served during the First World War. My grandfather served in the Second World War. They were both in the infantry. And when they came home, there was no recognition of their service to Canada. Of course, as many Indigenous people know, we didn't even have voting rights at that time, yet we chose to dedicate our service to this country. And for far too long, that service as well was not remembered on Remembrance Day, and Indigenous people were not invited to lay wreaths at the National War Monument.
Patrick Stevens is from Nipissing First Nation. He's served 22 years in the Canadian Navy. He says being a land protector is a sacred duty. That's why taking time for ceremonies like this is important.
Sometimes it's difficult to truly comprehend what some members may have gone through. I think it's a great honor and privilege to be here to support some of these veterans, Indigenous veterans, as well as the importance to remember truly what we've been through. Because if we know where we came from, we can definitely tell where we're going.
Annette Francis, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Winnipeg's Aboriginal Community Campus remembered Indigenous veterans today at their 27th annual ceremony. Sav Jonza has more on what took place at the event.
Today is a day for remembering Indigenous veterans, those who fought in wars despite struggles with racism in their home country. At the Niganon Centre in Winnipeg, children sang the national anthem in Ojibwe. And Manitoba's Premier, Wab Kinew, spoke directly to veterans and active service people.
We are deeply indebted to you for the sacrifices that you have made for all of us. Freedom is never free.
It was a powerful day for Melvin Swan, an ex-military police officer and residential school survivor.
It's been hard. I can't really put into white man's words how to explain that, because it's spiritual, it's powerful, it drives me.
In 1994, Swan won compensation and an apology from the Canadian Forces after the Manitoba Human Rights Tribunal found he had endured racism in the force.
Every day I still walk in spirit, and as I carry on with that spirit, it protects me, it guides me, and it connects me not only to my past and history, but to see things that others don't see, to understand the truth of our blood, our past, our treaties, our land.
William George Mann, co-founder and first president of the Manitoba Aboriginal Veterans Association, was also honored. His son, Wayne Mann Sr., spoke of his father's contributions to Indigenous veterans, leaving the hospital to attend the ceremony.
It's an emotional day because I wish my dad would be here. You know, he left a legacy. You know, that's what he did for all the comrades. You know, he left a legacy.
As the day comes and goes, Premier Canoe says Indigenous veterans will never be forgotten.
This phrase, "lest we forget," has an Anishinaabe translation. Kego wika onikesita. Kego wika onikesita literally means, let us never forget. And so today, as we pay tribute to those who have served and those who continue to serve, we recommit to you that we will never forget your sacrifice.
Sav Jonesa, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
For more on Indigenous Veterans Day, we're joined by Jennifer Wood. She is a residential school survivor whose father was a World War II veteran. She joins us in studio now. Jennifer, thanks for joining us. How do you reflect on your father's service on this Indigenous Veterans Day?
I reflect on my father's service by honoring and respecting him and being mindful of what he went through as a World War II veteran. I mean, he suffered a great deal, and I want all of Canada to be aware of the First Nations contributions that they made to our country in terms of our First Nation veterans enlisting into war. And many people probably don't know across Canada that the soldiers, you know, by rights didn't have to enlist because sadly they weren't considered citizens under the Indian Act. So I think of those things that he powered through and fought for his country, because he was a very proud man.
And it's well documented that Indigenous veterans were not treated well following their services. What were some of the challenges your father faced, and by extension you and your family faced following his service?
Well, following my father's service, I mean, we were greatly impacted as a large family, and me being the youngest. I mean, our father had PTSD, but back in that time, we didn't know he had PTSD. We would often wake up to him screaming, and, you know, we'd have to come and shake him awake. And we were always alerted and woken up in the middle of the night. So, and as you know, there was no services for the veterans at that time. And it wasn't even spoken about. So I don't know how he dealt with it, but certainly our family was impacted by that. And in the same breath, I have to say that, you know, a lot of the soldiers that he fought with side by side in Europe, in Britain, you know, when he came home to his home country that he fought for, he wasn't allowed to associate with them. He wasn't allowed to go in the pub and celebrate with them and sit side by side with his soldier friends, even though they fought in the same war for the same purpose, for the same country.
And why is it important to keep the memory alive of Indigenous veterans?
It's very important to keep the memory alive of the First Nation veterans. As I said before, they didn't have to enlist because they weren't considered a citizen. Nonetheless, they went out and they fought for their country. When my father was interviewed on the reserve, because he was one of the most esteemed elders in our community because of his linguistic language that he knew fluently, he said, we didn't go across and fight with bow and arrows. We fought with rifles, just like our non-native veterans. And, you know, he said things like that. So I want people to realize that our contribution was great. More importantly, the community that I come from, which is Niashingaming, Cape Croker in the English terms, we have the highest enlistment per capita of First Nations soldiers enlisting in the war. And that goes right across Canada. I'm sure a lot of our soldiers signed up to save our country.
And finally, do you think more could be done to honor Indigenous veterans?
I certainly do. They could be honored more extensively than they have been. I know they have a monument in Ottawa. I appreciate that. But certainly we could certainly honor them further at our legislatures here in Manitoba, in Winnipeg. We could go straight across Canada and have a monument in honor of our contributions of our soldiers. We could have them mentioned in all the schools. We could have them as part of our history. It could be part of a curriculum on the contributions that they made. There's many, many ways that we can honor our veterans. And I certainly hope in the era of reconciliation, I really sincerely hope that the governments of the day will take that challenge up and get those monuments to recognize our soldiers.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer, for sharing some of your family's story with us today.
Thank you very much.
And in Vancouver, National Indigenous Veterans Day was held in Vancouver today to honor those that served this country. APTN's Tina House has this story.
Here on this rainy day at Victory Square, it's about remembering those that sacrificed their lives.
It's our veterans who have laid the foundation for Canada's military and what it is today, and more importantly, what it can be.
Veteran Mike D'Angeli from the Nisga'a Nation served for 10 years, doing 4 tours, and joined at the age of 17. He said it still affects him to this day.
I came home with the same PTSD and colonial effects that we all are raised with, but I added to it with my many tours. I'm very grateful for this time. It's always difficult to remember. Remembering's the hard, especially as we get older. Remembering the things that we've done and remembering why did we do it when we look at how the world is.
Sam George is a residential school survivor, and today he's laying the wreath for the Indian Residential School Survivor Society.
Well, I was named after my uncle Sammy. I was born in 1944. He was overseas. I actually had 3 uncles. One came back. Samuel, James, Anthony. James and Anthony didn't come back.
No, for us it's fantastic. We're looking at
If they were still here today, what would you want to say to them?
Thank you.
We need to give our
Thank you for what you did for us.
Former MLA Melanie Mark says she is also very grateful for the contributions of Indigenous war veterans.
I think it's so important that we honor our elders. I think especially the few that are left, and they're so fragile. And it warms my heart, it breaks my heart, so I feel a lot of emotion. I think about what they've seen in their lifetime, the injustice, but also the justice, that they've lived long enough to start seeing reconciliation in action.
And one of those elders being honored today is Alan Alexander Derwin.
All elected brass, all the mothers and the fathers who sent their young ones to war and never came back, and the suffering they have to go through each and every day.
And on this day, we remember those that served in the wars, and today we honor you and remember you and thank you for your sacrifice. Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
We need to step aside for a short break, but coming up, the Manitoba Métis Federation shows supports for chiefs in Ontario fighting against Bill C-53. Welcome back to APTN National News. Last week, First Nations chiefs were in Ottawa asking to kill Bill C-53, the Métis self-government legislation. It's currently being studied by a parliamentary committee. This week, the Manitoba Métis Federation attended that committee to support the chiefs in that fight. William Goudon of the Manitoba Métis Federation testified that the Métis Nation of Ontario represents a patchwork of identities. He said they use First Nations ancestors and traditional territories, mix these with Red River Métis symbols, cultural heritage, and historic milestones, and call themselves Métis. He went even further and said the integrity of the actual Métis Nation is at stake.
Back in 2017, the province of Ontario and the government of Canada all of a sudden recognized a whole bunch, 5 or 6 or 7 new communities in Ontario with no connection to the historic Métis Nation. So the question that we need to ask ourselves is, if they're not connected to the historic Métis Nation, there is only one Métis Nation. Who are these people?
Voters in the Northwest Territories head to the polls on Tuesday, November 14th. The Sambake, the term for Yellowknife in the Dene Yati dialect, candidates forums are taking place literally every night. Our reporter Charlotte Morat-Jacobs was at one of them.
It's election season in the Northwest Territories, and political hopefuls are in the hot seat, this time from nonprofits at a candidates forum held in Yellowknife. Vying for Great Slave Riding, the only Indigenous candidate in the capital city, Stacey Arden-Smith, who believes GNWT needs to update their inventory of programs NGOs offer.
We want to make sure that we have need gap analysis. So making sure that when we're delivering programs amongst our NGOs, that there's no overlapping. When we're overlapping in some of these programs, it means that there's gaps in other areas.
Yellowknife Centre candidate Ambe Shenamu runs the Black Advocacy Coalition NGO and says he wants to streamline funding processes for nonprofits.
Writing grants is really tasking, and there's a lot of them out there, and we could never write enough grants to get enough money, right? So it's one of those things that nonprofits never get around to.
Around 40 people attended the forum.
Advocate as an MLA for the NWT to pilot a guaranteed basic income to ensure that no one gets left behind. A program like this would ensure that everyone is at the point where they have dignity to afford a place called home, to put food on the table.
Across the NWT, there's 56 candidates running. The Legislative Assembly is made up of 19 members, 3 of which are already acclaimed, including Caitlin Cleveland from the Can Lake riding.
So I want to talk about arrears. We have $15 million of arrears. Lots of them are owed by seniors. Those arrears are based on policies that don't even exist anymore. So why are we getting seniors and elders to pay on arrears that really are unfair and unequitable?
Former Yellowknife City Councillor Julian Morris, running in the Frame Lake riding, spoke towards the gap from the federal government's childcare subsidy and the cost of programming in the NWT.
There's some disagreement between parties as to how that gap is going to be filled, but the issue is going to be coming to a head very soon into the term of the 20th Assembly. So I would suggest an interim measure is going to have to be applied, which will give parties time to come together and develop a longer-term solution to the problem.
The event was hosted by 6 NWT nonprofits, including Native Women's Association of the NWT, who referenced the May 2023 disappearance of Frank Rubin in their question on lack of missing person legislation.
Had we had this legislation, do you think it could have changed the Frank Rubin case? What could we have done better?
The distance between the investigating officers and the families who are suffering in agony every day, we don't seem to close that. We don't seem to recognize that. I don't know if Victim Services has a mandate to kind of close that gap up, but not knowing what's going on is worse than nothing going on.
The election takes place November 14th. Charlotte Morat-Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
2 weeks ago, Nunavut's capital city elected a new city council. Now it's already seeing its first shakeup. Iqaluit City Council member and longtime Nunavut politician Jack Anawak has resigned following an alleged drunk driving incident over the weekend. RCMP have charged Anawak with 1 count of impaired driving and 1 count of driving beyond a safe alcohol level. However, according to a local newspaper, Nunatsiaq News, Anahuac cited a car crash over the weekend as the reason for his resignation. He will appear in court on January 25th, 2024. Anahuac represented what would become the riding of Nunavut as Member of Parliament from 1988 to 1997. He was elected to council October 23rd. A Northern First Nation plans to give an old inner-city hotel in Winnipeg a facelift. Details coming up after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. This photo was submitted by Teddy Starr. We're not sure where or when this photo was taken, but it was just too nice not to share. Thank you for watching, Teddy. Keep those photos coming and include any and all details you can when you email share@aptn.ca for the chance to be our next photo of the day. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting off on the East Coast, 6 degrees in snow in Halifax, 5 degrees in St. John's. -4 in sunshine in Nain, Kuujjuaq, -10. Quebec City, snowy, 0 degrees. Sept Îles, 3 degrees in snow. Sarnia, rainy, 9 degrees. North Bay, snow, 2 degrees. Kapuskasing, -1 in snow there. Big Trout Lake, -2. Churchill, -1, snowy there. Thompson, -4. Gimli, -1 in snow. Dauphin, +1. Regina, -2, mix of sun and cloud there. North Battleford, 0 degrees in snow. Stony Rapids, snowy, -7. Uranium City, -5. Sunshine in northern Alberta, -2 in Fort Chip, -4 in High Level. Calgary, 4 degrees in sunshine. Red Deer, +1. Vancouver, rainy and 10 degrees. Bella Coola, 8. Dease Lake, 5 degrees and rainy there. Smithers, +6. Beaver Creek, snowy, -9. Dawson, 5 degrees. Wrigley, -2 in sunshine there. Rainy and -2 in Yellowknife. Inuvik, -10 in snow there. Sax Harbor, sunshine, -18. Baker Lake, -18 in sunshine. Whale Cove, -17. Joe Haven minus 20, and snowy there. Arctic Bay minus 19. A Northern First Nation is behind plans to give an old inner-city hotel in Winnipeg a facelift. The Balmoral Hotel will be renamed the Pimichikamak Wellness Center. The Pimichikamak Cree Nation and partners will be turning the hotel into a medical boarding home for band members in Winnipeg for medical care. It will be equipped with a walk-in clinic, pharmacy, daycare, and bus depot while providing transportation to and from appointments. Band counselor David Lee Roy says there are also plans for a 28-suite low-income housing facility for longer-term patients.
We wanted to centralize all the services required by our people coming from up north to the city of Winnipeg. When they have medical appointments, they can stay in a hotel itself, the Pimichikamak Wellness Center. If they need pharmaceutical drugs or if they need access to a walk-in clinic, we're trying to centralize all of it. And we're not just thinking about our people from Pimichikamak territory. We're thinking about other relatives from other communities that can access to this.
And that's all the time we have for your midweek news. For news anytime or to catch up on our stories that you might have missed, visit our website at aptnnews.ca. I'm Savannah Kelly. Marcy Miigwech, thank you for joining us. Have a great night.